I'm willing to admit that nothing in the world would be better calculated to make a man leave his native country than a few hornets strictly tending the business. God said, kill the Canaanites slowly. Why? Lest the beasts of the field increase upon you. How many Jews were there? 3 millions. Going to a country how large? 12,000 square miles. But were there nations already in this holy land? Yes, there were 7 nations, mightier than the Jews. Say there would be 20 million when they got there, or 24 with themselves. Yet they were told to kill them, slowly, lest the beasts of the field increased upon them. Is there a man in Chicago that believes that? Then what does he teach it to little children for? Let him tell the truth. So the same God went into partnership with snakes. The children of Israel lived on manna. One account says all the time, another one only a little while. That is the reason there's a chance for commentaries, and you can exercise faith. If the book was reasonable, everybody could get to heaven in a moment. But whenever it looks as if it could not be that way, and you believe, you are almost a saint. And when you know that it is not that way and believe, you are a saint. He fed them on manna. Now, this manna is very peculiar stuff. It used to melt in the sun, and yet they used to cook it by seething and baking. I would as soon think of frying snow or boiling icicles. It shrank to an omer, no matter how much they gathered, and it swelled to an omer, no matter how little they gathered. What a magnificent thing manna would be for currency, shrinking and swelling according to the volume of business. There was not a change in the bill of fare for 40 years, and they knew God could just as well give them 3 square meals a day. They remembered about the cucumbers and the melons and the leeks and the onions of Egypt. And they said, our souls abhorreth this light bread. Then this God got mad. You know how cooks are always touchy. Thereupon he sent snakes to bite the men, women, and children. He also sent them quails in wrath and anger, and when they had the flesh between their teeth, he struck thousands of them dead. He always acted in that way, all of a sudden. People had no chance to explain, no chance to move for a new trial, nothing. I want to know if it is reasonable he should kill people for asking for one change in diet in 40 years. Suppose you had been boarding with an old lady for 40 years, and she never had a solitary thing on the table but hash, and one morning you said, my soul abhorreth hash. What would you say if she let a basket full of rattlesnakes upon you? Now, is it possible for people to believe this? The Bible says their clothes did not wax old. They did not get shiny at the knees or elbows, and their shoes did not wear out. They grew right along with them. The little boy starting out with his first pants grew up, and his pants grew with him. Some commentators insisted that angels attended to their wardrobe. I never could believe it. Just think of one of the angels hunting another one down and saying, there goes another button. I cannot believe it. There must have been a mistake somehow. Do you believe that the real God, if there is one, ever killed a man for making hair oil? And yet you will find in the Pentateuch that God gave Moses a recipe for making hair oil to grease Aaron's beard, and said that if anybody made the same hair oil, he should be killed. And they gave him a formula for making ointment, and they said that if anybody made ointment like that, he should be killed. I think that's carrying the patent laws to excess. Must have been some mistake about it. I cannot imagine the infinite creator of all the shining worlds giving a recipe for hair oil. Do you believe that the real God came down from Mount Sinai with a lot of patterns for making a tabernacle, patterns for tongs, for snuffers and such things? You believe that God came down from the mountains and told Moses how to cut a coat and how it should be trimmed? What would an infinite God care on which side he cut the breast and what color the fringe was and how the buttons were placed? Do you believe God told Moses to make curtains of fine linen? Where did they get their flax in the desert? Where did they weave it? Did it tell them to make things of gold and silver and precious stones when they hadn't them? Is it possible that God told them not to eat any fruit until the 4th year after planting trees? You see, all these things were written hundreds of years afterwards, and the priest, in order to collect the tithes, dated the laws back. They did not say, this is our laws, but thus God said to Moses in the wilderness. Now, can you believe that? Here's the scene. The eternal God tells Moses, this is the way I want you to consecrate my priest. Catch a sheep and cut his throat. I never could understand why God wanted sheep killed just because a man had done a mean trick. Perhaps it was because his priests were fond of mutton. He tells Moses further to take some of the blood and put it on his right thumb, a little on his right ear, a little on his right big toe. Do you believe God ever gave such instructions for the consecration of his priest? If you should see South Sea Islanders going through such a performance, you could not keep your face straight. And will you tell me that it had to be done in order to consecrate a man in the service of the infinite God? Suppose the blood got on the left toe. And then we find in this book how God went to work to make the Egyptians let the Israelites go. Suppose we wish to make a treaty with the Mikado of Japan, and Mr. Hayes sent a commissioner there. Suppose he should employ Herman, the wonderful German, to go along with him. And when they came to the presence of the Mikado, Herman threw down an umbrella, which changed into a turtle. And the commissioner said, "That is my certificate." You would say the country is disgraced. You would say the president of a republic like this disgraces himself with jugglery. Yet we are told God sent Moses and Aaron before the Pharaoh. And when they got there, Moses threw down a stick, which turned into a snake. That God is a juggler. He's an infinite prestidigitator. Is it possible? Was it really a snake, or was it the appearance of a snake? If it was the appearance of a snake, it was a fraud. Then the necromancers of Egypt were sent for, and they threw down sticks, which turned into snakes. But those were not so large as Moses' snake, which swallowed them. I maintain it is just as hard to make small snakes as it is to make large ones. The only difference is that to make larger snakes, larger sticks or more practice is required. You believe that God rained hell on innocent cattle, killing them in the highways and in the field. Why should he inflict punishment on cattle for something the owners had done? I could never respect any God that could so inflict pain upon a brute beast simply on account of the crime of his owner. Is it possible that God worked miracles to convince Pharaoh that slavery was wrong? Why did he not tell Pharaoh that any nation founded on slavery could not stand? Why did he not tell him, "Your government is founded on slavery, and it will go down, and the sands of the desert will hide from the view of man your temples and your altars and your fanes"? Why did he not speak about the infamy of slavery? Because he believed in the infamy of slavery himself. Can we believe that God will allow a man to give his wife the right of divorcement and make the mother of his children a wanderer and a vagrant? There's not one word about women in the Old Testament except the word of shame and humiliation. The God of the Bible does not think women are as good as men. She was never worth mentioning. It did not take the pains to recount the death of the mother of us all. I have no respect for any book that does not treat woman as the equal of man. And if there's any God in this universe who thinks more of me than he thinks of my wife, he is not well acquainted with both of us. And yet they say this was done on account of the hardness of their hearts, and that it was done in a community where the law was so fierce that it stoned a man to death for picking up sticks on Sunday. Would it not have been better to stone to death every man who abused his wife, and allowed them to pick up sticks on account of the hardness of their hearts? If God wanted to take those Jews from Egypt to the land of Canaan, why didn't they do it instantly? If he was going to do a miracle, why didn't they do one worth talking about? After God had killed the firstborn of Egypt, after he killed all the cattle, still Egypt could raise an army that could put to flight 600,000 men. And because this God overwhelmed the Egyptian army, he bragged about it for over 1,000 years, repeatedly calling the attention of the Jews to the fact that he overthrew Pharaoh and his host. Did he help much with their 600,000 men? We find by the records of the day that Egypt had a standing army at the time that was never more than 100,000 men. Must we believe all these stories in order to get to heaven when we die? Must you judge a man's character by the number of stories he believes? Are we to get to heaven by creed or by deed? That is the question. Shall we reason or shall we simply believe? But they say the Bible is not inspired about those little things. The Bible says the rabbit and the hare chew the cud, but they do not. They have tremendous motion of the lip, but the being that made them says that they chew cud. The Bible, therefore, is not inspired in natural history. Is it inspired in astrology? No. Then what is it inspired in? Is it in law? Thousands of people say that had it not been for the 10 Commandments, we would not have known any better than to rob and steal. Suppose a man planted an acre of potatoes, hoed them all summer and dug them all fall. And suppose a man sat on a fence all the time and watched him. Do you believe that it would be necessary for a man to read the 10 Commandments to find out who, in his judgment, had a right to take those potatoes? All the laws against larceny have been made by industry to protect the fruits of its labor. Why is there a law against murder? Simply because a large majority of people object to being murdered. That is all. And all these laws were in force 1,000 years before that time. One of the commandments said that they should not make any graven images, and that was the death of art in Palestine. No sculptor has ever enriched stone with the divine forms of beauty in that country. And any commandment that is the death of art is not a good commandment. But they say the Bible is morally inspired. And they tell me that there's no civilization without this Bible. Then God knows that just as well as you do. God always knew it. And if you can't civilize a nation without a Bible, why didn't God give every nation just one Bible to start with? Why did God allow hundreds of thousands and billions to go down to hell just for lack of a Bible?